Well, again, welcome to those of you here in the room, those of you watching online. And this morning we are launching a new series called Unshakable. And as I put together each of the weeks, I thought to myself, what would be a good title slide, like a logo? And so, not wanting to work so hard, I popped it into ChatGPT. The whole series, and this is what it came up with, and I thought, it does kind of unshakable. It feels like a movie, right? Liv saw it and goes, that looks like a movie poster. I'm like, that's cool. So we're going with that. But the series is actually born out of the very first week of our sermon series that we just got done with called Permission to Exhale. Somebody came up to me, and we were having this conversation about the state of the world. And the state of our state and our culture and the political and religious divisions. And then that person stopped and said to me, I just feel shaken. Not stirred, just kidding. I just feel shaken. And I thought to myself, what a great series, because we all feel shaken. It's totally understandable in our day and age. And so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to help to try and answer the question, how do we stand firm when everything around us feels unstable? Now, you might be thinking, well, amen, brother, preach it. That's me right now in my life. Or you may know somebody. It's like, oh, this is going to hit them really well. You know, I need to get this series to them. But that's the overarching question. How do we as Christ followers, people who love Jesus, love God, have trust and faith in Him, how do we stand firm, yes, in our faith, but just generally, emotionally, and spiritually in this world that feels like it's shaken? And every week, we're going to be using an item that's that's tied to stability, to being unshaken. Like this week is this, an anchor. Yeah, you see it on T-shirts, you see it on wristbands, you see it all over the place. But the anchor is a really cool image of God's faithfulness to us, but how we can be unshaken. And if you know about an anchor, raise your hand if you've been around boats or have a boat or whatever. Many of us do. You kind of get the gist of what an anchor does, right? You want to stay in one place, basically, and you drop the anchor over, so you stay in one place with the boat. But as I was studying a little bit more on this, did you know that centuries ago, sailors practiced something called kedging? Anybody know what kedging? Anybody, raise your hand if you've heard of this word before. There was one person first service, so don't feel bad. I'm going to educate you right now on what kedging actually is. So this is interesting. When a ship was stuck in the harbor, trapped by either a strong current or facing a dangerous, narrow challenge, they wouldn't just sit there or drift. What they would do is they'd take a smaller anchor, what they call a kedging anchor, and they would put it in another smaller boat, and they would row that boat out far enough to drop it into some solid ground in the water, and then the winch from the big ship would pull itself to where the anchor was. And then if they needed to, they would go this way, and so that way they could get through really narrow straits. I think they actually still do that sometimes if they need to. But it's just the smaller anchor would pull one step at a time forward the large ship. And that's what we're really doing in this series, and especially today, in a world that feels chaotic, we're going to drop our kedging anchor ahead of our emotions, ahead of our circumstances, and into the unshakable truth that God is, lower left, sovereign. That God is sovereign. He's not surprised. He's not reacting. He is reigning in all things. So even with that kind of backdrop, as Christ followers and many people, many of us walk around, as we talked about in the last series, with sort of a low-grade anxiety that we just can't seem to shake nowadays. I mean, you look at the grocery prices, the gas prices, family tensions. You turn on the news and there's political divisions, there's cultural upheaval, fraud is rampant in our state, in our country, and around the world, frankly. And there's moral and governmental confusion, and it leaves us unsettled. It's correct and understandable that many of us, or maybe people feel shaken. And so this instability that we feel, it's not just internal or even external. It's a theological framework. We know certain truths in our heads, but when the storm hits us, our hearts start drifting. And today we're going to start our journey to become unshakable people by dropping our anchor in the sovereignty of God, that He is actively reigning over all things for His glory and for our ultimate good. And so we need to do a quick definition. What is the sovereignty of God? I know it's a big churchy word, but it's used in governmental situations actually. But the sovereignty of God is simply this. He has the absolute authority and complete power over everything that exists. Over everything exists. He is supreme over everything. Author and theologian A.W. Pink wrote a book called The Sovereignty of God back in the 50s, really good read, and he wrote this: nothing happens outside of God's awareness, beyond His reach, or apart from His purpose. He does not simply observe history, He governs it. He does not simply know the future, He holds it. He does not merely permit events to unfold, He works through them with perfect wisdom and intention. And so the sovereignty of God does not mean He causes evil or that we're just sort of robots with no choices in our life. It means that even in a world of sin and chaos, God is never outmaneuvered, He's never caught off guard, and never without a plan or a purpose. Now that sounds all great, right? But humanly, at least for me, maybe you too, kind of raises some questions in my mind, right? Okay, if God is sovereign, why does He allow such corruption and hypocrisy in our world? If God is sovereign, why do bad things happen to... Oh, you've thought about this too. And then probably one of the most important ones for me right now. If God is sovereign, why didn't the wild beat the avalanche? Just kidding. It's getting a little heavy in here. I figured I'd throw some in there. But here's really a simple answer to this. You may have heard this illustration about the sovereignty of God. So He is sovereign, has absolute authority, in a way that a master weaver is sovereign over a tapestry. From beneath, that's where we are, the threads look tangled, knotted, no purpose, just a mess, right? That's what it looks like. But from above, it becomes a masterpiece. God is always working from above, even though we can't see it. And in a certain way, God reminds us of that in Psalm 46 that was read. It says, "Be still, know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our anchor." No, He is our fortress. He is all of that. And what's fascinating about Psalm 46 is it was written at a time when the world was so unstable when this was written. Nations were raging against each other. Kingdoms were collapsing. And the very ground beneath people's feet felt like it was shaking. Yet in the middle of the chaos, the psalmist, it wasn't David, it was one of the sons of Korah. Korah was one of the Levite priests group. One of the sons of Korah, moved by God, declares that God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in the shaking. Therefore, we will not fear, or maybe we will not react to the fear that we feel as humans. We will not give in to that fear, not even if the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. And then Paul's New Testament reading that Dirk read too ties into this, where he says in Romans 8, right? He says, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose." Now, from our side of the tapestry, again, from underwater, where we're looking at the anchor, our side of the tapestry, we see things happen in our life, and we tag it as, this is a bad thing that happened. To God, to those who are according to His purpose, the upper side, there is no bad thing that happens. difficult, it's hard. Anything from I stubbed my toe to the death of a child. Those are hard, horrible, tough things, aren't they? But ultimately, from the top side of the tapestry, God works together all things for good, who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. And this is a promise that God makes. Doesn't say every circumstance feels good, right? Like I just mentioned, we're the bottom side of the tapestry. We're underneath. We're looking up at the bottom of the boat, and it's ugly, and it's just, it's a mess. But every disappointment, every difficulty, every delay, God weaves together according to his purposes. Nothing is random in your life. Nothing is wasted. Nothing slips through his hands. Nothing you experience is devoid of purpose. Okay, 2 nautical stories. The second one is Jesus in the boat, but the first one I found interesting. In 1748, there was a young English sailor named John Newton, and yes, I AI'd that guy too. John Newton, he was on this ship called the Greyhound, crossing the North Atlantic. Now, Newton was, by his own admission, a profane, reckless man, he said. A former slave trader with no faith in God and no interest in even the things of God. He doesn't need faith. He's got his life together. But on March 21st of that year, a huge storm struck that area, and that storm actually lasted for weeks. The ship he was on was nearly destroyed, water pouring in. They tried to anchor near a small island. They tried kedging, but nothing worked. The men were being swept overboard on this ship. And Newton himself, get this picture, Newton himself tied himself to the ship's pump, which was manual at that point, not electronic. He tied himself to the ship's pump, and he worked the pump for 9 hours straight to keep it afloat, but he fully expected to die. In that storm, terrified, utterly helpless, John Newton did something he hadn't done since childhood. He cried out to God. He said, God, save me. And he survived. The storm eventually passed, and Newton began to read the Bible genuinely for the first time. He actually went on to become a pastor. He was an abolitionist who helped William Wilberforce end the British slave trade. And at one point, he put pen to paper and wrote a few sentences that you may have heard before. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Newton spent the rest of his life just marveling at that same truth. None of it was wasted. Even his life from before to his life now, none of it was wasted. Then second story, we just read, Mark 4. 35 to 41. Jesus and the disciples set out across the Sea of Galilee in the evening, and it wasn't a huge ocean. It was a freshwater lake, and that's actually a picture of the Sea of Galilee with a storm on it. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But it was this freshwater lake, 13 miles long, 8 miles wide. It sits 700 feet below sea level in sort of a bowl, and it's actually, I believe, the lowest freshwater lake in the world. So it's way down there, and what happens is warm air rises off the lake, and then there's 2 mountain ridges. I've been there, these 2 mountain ranges on the west side, and they're kind of like this in a V. They act like a funnel, so the cold air from the Mediterranean Sea comes out this way, down onto this lake, and just immediately it's like a hurricane. In fact, the word that some of the other gospel writers says that it was a hurricane type picture. And the disciples weren't in a luxury lot. That's why these waves, we might think, oh, my pontoon can get through that, right? But with this little boat, this resembled several years ago, they found a boat at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee when there was a drought, and it's called the Jesus boat. You can look it up. It's pretty interesting. But the Jesus boat is about 27 feet long, about 7 feet wide. So it's not a huge boat. And several of the disciples from our story were professional fishermen. So for them to be afraid, they knew they were in danger. They knew exactly the situation. Waves were breaking over the boat. Water was filling fast. And these tough, experienced men were terrified that they were going to drown. And Jesus was taking a nap in the back of the boat, completely at peace. In their panic, you remember, they woke him up and they cried, "Teacher, don't you care if we're perishing? This is an all-hands-on-deck kind of thing. We need everybody to help us steady the boat." And so Jesus woke up, stood up, and he did this. He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Peace, be still." So I'm going to right-click on that a little bit. And you know what that means, right? When you right-click, it brings up a menu. You go deeper. So I don't know, it's something the kids say nowadays. So I'm going to right-click on that. The English translation, I'm not disparaging our English translations, but it's too soft. It's way too soft in this situation. Jesus uses the same, Mark uses the same language that Jesus describes yelling at demons. And he uses the same language to yell at this storm. The English word rebuke the wind sounds poetic, but to a first century listener, it sounded like an exorcism of creation itself. Jesus was upset, and what he said was even stronger. Again, peace be still is just too calm. What he actually said to the Jewish ear would have heard this back then was this. He stood up and rebuked, using language against demons, and he said, "Shut up." I mean, if that offends you, I'm sorry, but that's the language. That's what Jesus actually said to the wind and the waves. Shut up. And it's what he said, what you would say to a heckler, if you will, or somebody talking out of turn. And then the rest of the "be still, be calm" is actually in the original is "be muzzled." Be quiet, be muzzled. Like a wild animal being muzzled. Be muzzled and come out of him is when Jesus healed a man in Mark 1. In essence, "you shall not pass," right? If you get that imagery. So Jesus wasn't gently calming the sea. He's commanding it like you'd command a raging beast or an unruly spirit, the force that would have been shocking. And to the Jewish ears, God was muzzling a chaotic sea. And what happened? The wind died down. The waves died down, the sea became completely calm. And he turned to the disciples and asked them that question, "Why were you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And what's interesting is there's a miracle just even what happened with the wind and the waves that we don't get. When the waves are going on a lake, and let's say the wind just automatically stops, it takes a while for the waves to kind of calm down, doesn't it? This was immediate, and the disciples recognized that this was different. It was a double miracle, if you will. The wind, wow, that was cool. But the waves immediately from storm waves to glass. Water skiing, glass. That was the miracle. And the great truth here is we anchor our lives in especially when we're feeling shaken, we anchor our lives in this truth. God is not reacting to the chaos. He's reigning over it. The storm was real. Storms are real in your life. The danger was real, right? It's not a reaction. It's a reigning. The waves that He created, He rules over. And in Jewish thinking, the sea represents chaos. And He spoke, and the chaos was completely calm. God's sovereignty does not mean we will never face those kinds of storms. Psalm 46 assumes trouble is coming. Maybe you're in trouble right now, and you feel it. Maybe online you're going, man, this is me. The promise is not the absence of storms, but the presence of God in the middle of them. And that's why with this series and even today, we could say, because God is sovereign, I can be unshakable. Say that with me. Ready? Go. Because God is sovereign, I can be unshakable. And we know it's not us. Our unshakability is because we are anchored in the God who saves. We are anchored in the God who has control of all things. So today, as we close up your view, maybe your view of the horizon of your life might be blocked by the waves of a struggle right now. Name that honestly to God. Cry out and just say, God, you're telling me to be still. Let that interrupt your anxiety. Remind yourself of the one truth, from Romans 8, from the boat story, from John Newton's storm, and then release control and trust for that. Do what you need to do to handle the situations that are difficult. But in all things say, God, I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to leave the results up to you. That's trust. That's forgiveness. That's grace. John Newton, to close up, wasn't supposed to survive that storm. He wasn't supposed to amount to anything, but God was sovereign over every moment of it, and his grace led him home. That's the same grace that leads you when everything feels like it's shaking. The same grace. And so we are ordinary people standing on something solid while everything else shakes, because God is who he is. We can be unshakable because God is unshakable. Amen? Amen. Let's stand to pray.